Hello. So I'm going to introduce myself. This is, I guess, kind of like an episode of the Take Care of Yourself Tuesday, where we focus on topics related to self-care. Today, you're joined by myself and Adam, who I'll let him introduce himself. My name is Kayla Meador. I'm a therapist at the Carruth Center. We're going to be talking about sleep today.
And my name is Adam, so I'm a graduate student. I work part-time in the Carruth Center, and I'm also getting my doctorate in sport and exercise psychology. And yeah, like Kayla said, we're going to be talking a lot about sleep hygiene today, which is very, very relevant for everyone, but particularly college students. And in the midst of this pandemic, something that is a lot of people are dealing with, figuring out how to regulate their sleep.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll just kind of hop in and, start just by talking about, why sleep's important. Sleep is I always consider it the best form of self-care. And again, particularly for college students, when you have so many demands on a day-to-day basis with classes and school assignments and then social events. And if students are athletes, having athletics or even just maintaining some type of fitness lifestyle, it's really easy to sacrifice sleep to try to make time for all those responsibilities. And sleep is probably the last thing you should sacrifice, because that is where our bodies recharge, we recover, and we really give ourselves the energy we need to take on the next day. And so we're just going to be talking a lot about kind of the ins and outs of sleep, and some of the ways that we can really maximize the amount of rest and recovery we give our bodies during, every night, so that we are prepared for each and every day. And obviously schedules are going to look a lot different right now in the midst of this pandemic than are typical in the day-to-day life of a college student.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'd say that sleep is something that has been a topic of concern for students, I'd say pre-COVID-19. But in a lot of ways, COVID-19 has impacted sleep for folks. So we're going to be talking a little bit about that as well. Some of the things that we've been hearing, just how COVID-19 has impacted sleep, maybe in positive ways for some, but and also in some negative ways for some folks too.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah. And basically, something we've, like Kayla said, of, this lack of structure and this lack of really any schedule, it can be really hard to come up with any type of nighttime routine. Students staying up till 2, 3 a.m. and then sleeping in till 1, 2 p.m. And so we just wanted to give some basic sleep guidelines and just ways to help maximize that rest that you can get even in the midst of this pandemic.
Yeah, as we think about self-care, I mean, often I'm thinking about, like, obviously, it's a part of taking care of yourself, but it's easy to look at those like mind, body, soul kinds of pieces of self-care and the ways that we take care of our body. Sleep is definitely one of those, but I think it's been one of those, as you mentioned, can be easily sacrificed. And what I've seen a lot is it's one of the first things to go if you have to cram and study for an exam, or if you're really too busy, or if maybe your schedule is kind of all over the place, so you're not really able to establish a routine very well. But it is a basic human need. It's a fundamental need that obviously we all need to engage in. But any kinds of like disruptions in sleep, folks might notice, it might mimic like mental health issues. You might notice that impacting your mood, your energy levels, relationships could be impacted. Obviously, your attention, your concentration, your ability to make decisions, productivity. So in a lot of ways that impacts all of these other areas, or can impact all of these other areas of our lives if it's not something that we're really paying attention to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and something that's really important to consider there too is, you can almost think about sleep, if you think of our bodies as like a car or a battery, we want to start each day as close to 100% or a full tank as possible. And if we're cutting out, 25% of the sleep we're supposed to be getting, we're going to be starting every day at 75%, which means we're going to crash earlier. We're probably not going to be functioning at full capacity. And when it's something as important as sleep, yeah, that may be an hour that, hey, yeah, I could stay online watching this movie or playing Xbox or whatever, an extra hour, but that the following day could have a huge impact. And so that's definitely something we want to reiterate is, you know, the importance of kind of these pillars of self-care of, you know, sleep, hydration, nutrition, exercise. Those are so important and really can't afford to be sacrificed.
Mm-hmm. It's also something that we have control over. And I know that's not a luxury that we all have right now with COVID-19. And there's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of things that are kind of outside of our control. But these things that we're talking about on these Tuesday events are things that we can take some control over.
For sure. And you know, kind of transitioning into some of the basic guidelines for sleep. And you know, one of the things with sleep guidelines is it's going to look different for each person. So there's no right or wrong amount of sleep for each person, but roughly the CDC says for individuals 18 to 60, at least 7 hours of sleep per night. For college students and adolescents, a lot of times I'll say, actually, you know, we want at a minimum 8, but if you can get 9 or more, that's even better. And the reason is, as when we're younger, we tend to need more sleep, and then as we age, we start to need a little bit less. And for those of you who have had, you know, nights where maybe you've pulled all-nighters or gotten 2 or 3 hours of sleep and you wake up and you just feel miserable, compare that to what it feels like when you get a solid night's rest. I mean, it can make such a big difference. And so the reason why kind of that 7, 8, 9 hours is so great is we give ourselves enough time to go through 4 to 5 REM cycles. And those cycles are typically about 90 minutes. And we want to make sure that we complete 4 or 5 per night. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later on in this. And so, you know, some of the things too that can be, you know, helpful or signs that, you know, maybe I'm not getting enough sleep is, first of all, one thing I always like to point out is naps. A lot of people can get themselves into this routine where maybe they'll sleep 4 hours per night and then they'll take a 3-hour nap during the day. And I understand that works, but the research suggests that napping for long periods during the day is actually negatively impacts our sleep during the night. So you're kind of constantly running at this 60% charge rather than giving your body and brain enough time to recharge to 100%. So if you are someone who naps and that's something you can't sacrifice, keeping those rests to 20, 30 minutes during the day just to give you a little power boost. And then really trying to save the long night's sleep for the evening. And again, the benefits of sleep are, you're going to notice physical benefits, mental health benefits. You're going to be less stressed out. You're going to be more productive. And everything is just going to seem a little bit more manageable. And again, sleep is like the antidote for so many of the uncomfortable things that can come our way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and what this does take a little bit of awareness. I mean, even something like tracking your sleep might be a helpful place to start, keeping track of when you're going to sleep or when you're waking up, or even kind of logging if you're somebody who wakes up constantly throughout the night but you never really paid attention to it. Like, paying attention to some of those things is a really helpful place to start, especially if you are someone who is noticing kind of like all day fatigue or concentration issues or, you know, mood fluctuations. You know, I heard you saying, Adam, obviously the recommended amount of sleep, it can vary person to person, but, you know, like ideally probably somewhere between the 7 to 9 hour range. I hear a lot of students sometimes who will tell me like, oh, but I do so well on like only 4 and 5 hours of sleep, which maybe somewhat true, but to sustain a sleep routine or a sleep pattern like that over a long period of time, it's probably not the ideal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would argue that, you know, for those individuals, they may function perfectly fine on 4 to 5 hours, but I promise you they would function almost twice more effectively as with the required amount of sleep. And so it's just something that can really, you know, go a long way to enhance our overall well-being and lifestyle on a day-to-day basis. And yeah, so kind of like you were saying, Kayla, you know, I think one of the things that's so difficult about this period is you go from having all this structure to nothing. And you know, when you think of bedtime, that's a routine. You really have to kind of prepare your body, prepare your mind that, hey, it's time for us to go to sleep and get some rest. And if we don't prime ourselves to do that, it's going to be hard to unwind. And so one of the big recommendations, especially during this pandemic, is to really give yourself some time for bedtime, whether that's, you know, hey, 30 minutes before I'm going to sleep, I'm going to start to turn off my electronics. I'm going to start to turn down the lights. I'm going to get the temperature to be really comfortable. And I'm just going to send my body and mind signals that, hey, I'm starting to prepare to go to sleep. And so often students will, you know, you'll go from watching a TV show and try to go to sleep right then. And that can be really hard for our brains to transition from actively watching something to rest. So that extra 20, 30-minute process of preparing can go a long way and can really help us get that restful sleep we need.
Mm-hmm. So just kind of, I guess, skipping around here, we can talk a little bit about some of the myths about sleep.
Yeah, for sure.
I think my favorite is this concept of catching up on sleep.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I believe that for the majority of my life of like, hey, you know, if you get 3 hours of sleep one night, just, you know, get an extra 5 hours the next night and you're good to go. And it just does not work that way. You know, if you get 3 hours of sleep one night, you're going to be more tired the next day, but our bodies cannot make up sleep from previous nights where we didn't get enough rest. And yeah, Kayla, feel free to elaborate on that.
Well, I recently told this to my mom, which I think she wouldn't mind me sharing this. And she continues now. It's been a few weeks since then to bring it up and say this is like the wildest thing she's ever heard. What do you mean I can't catch up on sleep? But it's something that I hear a lot from students too. Like, oh, on the weekends, that's when I'll catch up from an all-nighter. But I mean, so really there is no catching up on sleep that's been lost. When it's lost, like we can't get it back. So just like you're saying, the very next day, obviously you're going to see some impacts of that. And honestly, I think more sleep. So then if you spend a whole day sleeping, I think that increases your fatigue too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And, you know, I think there's that kind of plays into this, you know, there's this kind of myth about, you know, quality versus quantity of, oh, hey, yeah, I get, you know, even if I'm getting 8-9 hours of sleep per night, and yeah, I'm waking up feeling tired, but I'm getting the required amount. And, you know, with sleep, quality is just as important, if not more important than quantity. And so when you think of, you know, things that can impact our quality of sleep, that might be, you know, substance use or drinking caffeine, tobacco products, and just general substance use can, you know, it may help us fall asleep faster and may help us sleep longer, but the quality of sleep is going to be very poor. And so that's why, I mean, I experienced it myself with just poor night's sleep, and I know lots of clients I've had this conversation with of, man, I've been sleeping, you know, 10, 11 hours per night on weekends, but I don't wake up feeling rested, and you start to ask them what they had done right before going to bed. And you can understand, hey, okay, well, let's change up that pre-routine to make sure that we're getting the quantity and the quality of sleep that we need. And that can be something too that, is kind of like a misnomer as well of, weekends or even now when every day kind of feels like a weekend is a day to catch up on sleep. But again, that's that quantity and quality. There needs to be that balance.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things we can do is talk about this concept of sleep hygiene.
Mm-hmm.
I know we're relying on internet here, so I'm wondering if I cut out a little.
Yes. So yeah, in terms of, I'm on
Okay,
my
so I'm
internet's
going
a
to
little
share my
off.
screen just.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, so these are just some kind of basic sleep strategies that Kayla has put together, and this is just kind of a nice handout. And if you're listening to this or watching this and want to take a screenshot of this and even kind of put it up or keep it next to your bed, these are all just really great strategies to help improve both the quantity and quality of sleep. We've talked about kind of the routine, the importance of setting up a routine and having sleep rituals to kind of prime our body and mind that, hey, it's time for us to recharge. We've talked about kind of avoiding whether it's caffeine, nicotine, alcohol, turning off screens. There's also, a lot of stuff during the day that we can do that can really impact our ability to get the rest we need that evening. And that includes exercising, eating the right foods, and especially too, if you think right before bed, it's not advisable to eat right before you go to sleep, particularly if it's something that could upset your stomach, like spicy foods or something like that. Again, the no naps. And, one thing too, that's kind of counterintuitive, Kayla, and I see you smile and I'm wondering if you've done this in the past, if, you hear about like, you're supposed to count sheep or, just keep trying to fall asleep if it's not working. And that's actually not what you're supposed to do. If you're unable to fall asleep after maybe 30 minutes of lying in bed, it's really important to actually get up, do something new, take your mind off of it. And then once you feel tired, you can go back to bed, because again, we really want our brain to associate bed with sleeping or sex. And those are kind of the two purposes of our beds. And so if we just spend, 2 hours just waiting to fall asleep, we may lose that connection of, hey, our bed is where we go to rest.
And a lot of folks might find that because we are habitual creatures, our sleep routine tends to be the same way, which is like a part of that routine and a part of those rituals is also some of the things that we do even before bed, the things that tell us that or get our mind ready for, okay, we're going to sleep, which might even be like washing your face, drinking hot tea, turning your electronics off. Like all of those things become a part of that routine that tells your mind, okay, we're going to sleep. But what can also happen is that can, like a part of your routine can also be that laying in bed for hours and hours and not being able to fall asleep, because now your brain connects that with that experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that's something to think about too, which is why getting up and getting out of bed is so important.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Yeah. And our brain is just this, it's basically a computer, and everything we do, it can associate with different things. And so that's why the more of these strategies we can incorporate the healthier our sleep hygiene practices are likely to be.
I would even encourage when you get up and get out of bed to maybe do something that's not super stimulating. You know, I wouldn't say go and run a mile, but maybe you could do some light stretching or yoga or meditating or read a book. You know, something that's not going to be overly stimulating and that might even help to relax, but something that you're doing outside of the bed.
Mm-hmm.
And I know, Adam, you mentioned only using the bed for sleeping and for intimacy, which has historically, I think, been a challenge for most of the students that I've talked with, especially those living in dorms, which I know maybe isn't the case right now. But for a lot of students, their bed is kind of the place where they do everything. They eat, they do homework, they might be working there, they watch TV, they online shop or watch TikTok videos or, you know, whatever it is. But a lot of things are being done in the bed. And so our brain isn't associating our bed then with the place that we sleep. It's kind of a place for fun. It's a place that we do all these other things. So that's something that's really important to think about, is maybe trying to do only sleeping or having intimacy in the bed rather than some of all of these other things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm really glad you mentioned that, Kayla, because you know, even for students at home, they may associate their room may be their space, and that's where they spend a lot of their time. And the comfiest place in people's rooms is often their bed. And so it's really important you know, we don't want to take away that safe space. But if we can create some other area in the room that's equally as comfortable, but that's kind of our chilling spot, and then saving, you know, our bed where we sleep. You know, again, the sole purposes of that bed are sleep and intimacy, and everything else we're going to kind of move to this other station.
Yeah. I'd say a few other kind of practices of contention is turning off screens is probably one. And I'll admit that's one that's challenging for me too, where I have to really consciously think about it. I really have to consciously think about turning my TV off at a certain time and not touching my phone, even if I'm bored. But I do use my phone for like sleep meditations and things like that. But I try not to do a whole lot of scrolling and things like that, which, you know, there's research out there saying that the blue light from screens can impact your sleep and your ability to go through each one of those sleep cycles. And so that's something to think about too. Maybe not turning them off, you know, indefinitely, obviously, but maybe about like 30 minutes prior to when you're anticipating laying down to go to bed to try to stay away from screens if that's possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and even now too, there are apps. You know, if you have an iPhone, you can just turn it on to night mode. And then there are apps on computers and even TV screens. You can change the brightness. And again, you know, if you're watching a TV show on full brightness right before bed, our brain's going to get confused and think it's daytime. But if you know, we have to watch something, you know, let's try to make that screen as dark as possible with not very intense light. And that at least is going to tell our brain, hey, whatever we're doing, it's nighttime. And we're getting close to that point where it's time to go to sleep.
Mm-hmm. I'd say another one that comes up a lot is well, either the caffeine and nicotine or alcohol. So, you know, we're talking about maybe alcohol or other substances. One thing to know about caffeine, especially, and this is something I learned probably in the last year, is just kind of thinking about the half-life of caffeine, which is about 6 hours. So depending on when you go to sleep, just kind of keeping in mind when your last drink of caffeine is. So, you know, if you go to bed at 9 p.m., if you're drinking caffeine at 3 and 4 in the afternoon, it's likely still going to be in your system and impacting your ability to go to sleep in some way. So that's just something to kind of keep in mind, which some of these days it's difficult not to drink caffeine well into the evening or the afternoon. And the other piece is when it comes to alcohol. And this probably is another point of contention for students, where I've heard from students, oh, but I sleep so well when I drink alcohol, or after I've had a couple of drinks, which is, so it probably does feel that way because alcohol is a depressant. And so it is going to play a part in shutting your body down, and probably quicker, easier than anything else. But it also doesn't allow you to get to all of the sleep cycles that you need. So when we're talking about quality of sleep, you're not going to hit a REM cycle or a deep sleep cycle when there's alcohol in your system. And so, yes, it may feel like, yeah, you're able to go to sleep a little bit easier, but it's not going to be quality sleep.
Yeah. And I've also heard from lots of students, like, yeah, I slept 11 hours, this weekend on Saturday night, but I woke up and felt horrible and not rested at all. And it goes back to that exact point of, well, it doesn't really matter how much you sleep if you're not getting those REM cycles and that deep sleep, which is where the real kind of restoration for our body, mind, and soul happens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I know some of this we've already touched on, like using a sleep diary. If you have like a smartwatch, I know there's some of them that will even track your sleep for you. But if you don't have that luxury, just kind of writing down notes and trying to pay attention to what your sleep does look like, something like that would be really helpful, as I mentioned before. Even if you're if it's just something like you're waking up a lot, or just kind of getting a track of that so that you know what that looks like. And then you can make changes to that or adjustments to that moving forward. And I think it's important to mention, so anytime I go over anything like this, it might look like it's a checklist. So students might be looking at this and thinking, oh my God, I have so many things that I need to change, because of this really long, extensive list on here. Don't feel like you need to change each one of these things. If you're able to just take a look at a couple of these things and to make adjustments or make changes for a couple of these things, I would try to tackle one at a time, or one that feels most comfortable for you, or maybe one that feels like the biggest struggle for you. I would try to look at it just as kind of like suggestions, but this isn't the rule to make all of these changes at once.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can think of it like a menu to improve your sleep hygiene. You get to pick and choose what you want to try and experiment with. Rarely are you going to order the whole menu. And so just kind of picking ones that look good to you at first, and just seeing kind of how that affects your day to day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I'll share, a lot of what's been shared in this podcast, this video cast today, at least for myself. I'm not a sleep specialist, but this is something that I've researched a lot, and that is one of the first things that I kind of hone into when I'm talking with students is kind of finding out, like, what does their sleep look like, especially if they are reporting symptoms like what we've talked about before with attention, concentration, and fatigue. And well, what does your sleep look like? How busy are you? What does your schedule look like? And how can we implement some structure here so that maybe your sleep looks a little bit better? So these are just things that we know to be kind of good practice when it comes to sleep. There's certainly tons and tons of other resources out there too. So, I would encourage the use of any resources that you find.
Yeah, for sure. And also too, your story is going to give you suggestions too. So if things have worked for you in the past, strategies or routines, and that you haven't done them in a while, it could be a good time to try to start doing that again. Whether that's, having a stuffed animal, or even just listening to some type of music or something like that. Little things can go a long way, and our brain is just amazing at remembering things that comfort us. And when we want to fall asleep, we want to be comfortable. So that may seem a little silly, like grabbing a stuffed animal or something like that. But trust me, that those things, can go way far back into our childhood. Those can make a big, big difference as well.
Yeah. And I always come back to this piece about self-compassion and having some kindness for yourself along the way. There might be a night where you end up staying up really late, binge watch Netflix, or and you don't necessarily tend to the sleep schedule that you had set before, that's okay. Obviously we know that we can catch up on that lost sleep, but it is okay. And so I always encourage having some self-compassion along the way. And, if one thing doesn't work, that's fine. You can try something else and kind of find something that works for you and that feels best for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. And I think, when you think of perfect sleepers, that's impossible. And that self-compassion piece is so important. And that acceptance too of, hey, if you get 4 hours of sleep per night, there's nothing, the only person that's going to affect is you. You're not hurting anyone else. But then kind of the flip side of that is then kind of accepting that, hey, the next day I'm going to be pretty tired. And, a lot of students who I've talked with, they're really tired and they're upset that they're tired. And, then when we dive into what their sleep hygiene's like and you say, oh, well, you see you're getting 5 hours of sleep per night, of course you're going to be tired. So if you're okay with getting 5 hours of sleep and being tired, then we don't really have to change anything. But if that frustration is so big that something needs to change, then we need to increase that number. And so that's where it's kind of, hey, if I'm getting less than what's recommended, I'm probably going to be tired and not feel great the next day. And that's just an acceptance thing. If we get upset about that, it's just going to compound how all those feelings of kind of dread and not feeling up to our best self.
Mm-hmm. Well, Adam, I'm wondering if we missed anything or if there's anything that we want to cover before we sign off here.
I think we got most of it. I think we covered most of it. So yeah, I mean, if people have questions, I think we have, email addresses on the website. And this is obviously something too that, as this series continues and if it continues in this format, we can always circle back if we get interest from students. So I think we covered everything that was on the agenda.
Yeah, me too. I'm going to take a second and thank Adam so much for doing this with me and for being willing to kind of go along the journey and talk a little bit about sleep. And so just like he said, if folks do have any questions, please feel free to reach out. Attend with us on Tuesdays at 6.
Yeah, and thank you, Kayla, for leading these and putting these together and making it easy to facilitate. And thank you, everyone, for listening to this. And yeah, Tuesdays at 6 p.m. moving forward, we'll be here. And information's on the Carruth website, so feel free to come join us if you're interested.